Hi, and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast. Episode 129 is an interview with Luke Nelson, chiropractor at Health and High Performance in Mont Albert Melbourne. Luke is a regular on the podcast, and today he's talking to us about ankle sprains. If you're a trail runner, you will probably have dealt with this, but it actually can even happen to road runners. There are such things as gutters and potholes, and it doesn't help if you're a bit uncoordinated like me. So I hope you find this episode informative. And if you do and you enjoy it, please could you do me a favour and subscribe and write a review? It truly doesn't really take too much time. I know it's a bit of a hassle, but it means so much to me. Not only does doing this help to boost the ratings of the show, if I can speak, but it also increases its audience reach. This means that more athletes like yourself get to listen. And it really does make my day reading the reviews. The link is in the show notes. Are you sick and tired of being injured or running in pain? Ensure you are ready for racing in 2022, surely, and come in and see the team at Health and High Performance. Love running again by heading to healthhp.com.au/run, or you can easily find them on Instagram, Health High Performance, where they post heaps of helpful videos. Wild Earth Australia are the online store to help you make the most of the outdoors with top quality gear at great prices. Peak Endurance podcast listeners can use the discount code Peak Endurance, all caps, to get 10% off their already really good prices at checkout. Head on over to wildearth.com.au to get everything you need for your next adventure. Now I have about 2 coaching places left. If you are planning a race in 2022, now is the time to get started on your training. To secure a place on Team Peak Endurance, email me, Isabel, at peakendurancecoaching.com.au, and don't forget to spell Isabel with an O, to get the ball rolling. I hope this informative episode will help you if you have sprained your ankle, but of course, this podcast does not substitute for medical advice, so please see your specialist if you are feeling any sort of pain. It's always best to get something officially diagnosed so you know exactly what you are dealing with. If you get value from this episode, which I really hope you do, I would love it if you could share it with a friend, either on social media or directly. If you do share it on socials, don't forget to tag me so I can thank you. Anyway, enjoy the episode and then have a great week of running and training, and have fun out on the trails. And hopefully the weather is improving for you wherever you are, and that you get to enjoy some more of it.
Well, not so much in the road runners, but certainly the trail runners can have their fair share of these. So
That's right. Now, what we're talking about today, listeners, of course, is ankle sprains. So I'm sure there are plenty of people who have experienced this, myself included, on the trails. So this is a good one to talk about. I'll leave it in your capable hands, Luke.
Thanks, Isabel. Well, yeah, it is a very common injury that we see just really across the board in sports. In fact, it is the most common injury in sports. So very common to see across all, and not just in sports, but pretty much 70% of us will sustain an ankle sprain at some stage in our lives. So 7 out of 10 people will sprain their ankle. So the stuff that we're going to cover today is not just applicable for those runners that might sprain their ankle, but it can also happen if you're tripping over the kids' toys around the house and injuring the ankle that way. So I've seen plenty of fair share of from those. It is,
and just saying to the listeners who are listening, you'll have to check out the YouTube video, because there's quite horrendous clip of someone playing tennis hurting their ankle, and I can barely look at it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll quickly get through this slide so I don't have to keep watching this over on loop by loop. But it is not a common injury we see in road runners, mainly because they're running on sort of a stable surface. They're putting one foot in front of the other. But on the trail, it is something that's where we see it becoming a bit more of a common injury, with unstable surfaces and rocks and tree roots and all those sort of things, and poor lighting and fatigue after 100 Ks. You can not knowing where you're putting your feet. So that is something that we do see more commonly in the trail runners. That's whilst it might not be so much in the road, certainly in those. Now, it's also got one of the problems is it not only is it so common to sprain your ankle, but it's got one of the highest re-injury rates as well too. So once you've done your ankle, you're certainly more common. It's more more likely to
Why
re-injure
is that?
There's a few reasons why, and we'll discuss that as well soon. But
okay.
but you basically, in terms of the risk of injury, you've got 2 times the risk of re-injuring after you sprain your ankle, and that 40% of those that sprain their ankle will go on to develop what's called chronic ankle instability, and this is where you have those sprains over and over again, which is quite high. Like 4 out of 10 people that sprain their ankle will go on to have all these recurrent issues, and we'll also talk about what that is as well. And so that's where we often, patients come to us and they say, oh yeah, I think it's just an ankle sprain, it's don't need to worry about it. But ankle sprains, as we just shown, can actually become highly problematic. So it's often one of these injuries that people will dismiss, but it's often they're worse off because of that. And so we want to make sure that we really address the impairments and making sure that you get a full return to function after you sprain your ankle. And we'll talk about some of the stuff that you can do later on as well. So basically what chronic ankle instability is it's those people that complain of, that the ankle just sort of gives way. And it's usually the ankle rolling inwards. So it's sort of stretching that outside of the ankle area there. We know that also that it's not actually ligament looseness that causes that to happen. And some people say, oh, I've just overstretched my ligaments, that's why they're just loose, they're loose there. But in actual fact, what we know, there's been studies that have looked at that, is that the ligaments aren't any looser there. They're the same as anyone else's. What's actually happening there is it's more the body's ability to control that ankle. So it's actually more a control, strength, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. So it's not loose ligaments that cause these to happen. So why do they become so recurrent? So firstly, did you get the diagnosis right? Was there something else that's going on there that's actually causing this to happen again and again? The second reason is that it wasn't rehabbed correctly after you injured it. So did you address all the appropriate impairments that were going on? Did you return to sport or return to running too early? Did you push things along a little bit too much there? You didn't have that full strength or full range of movement back in the ankle. So there can be some issues that weren't properly addressed there. Or 3, that there could be just reasons outside of our current understanding. So chronic ankle instability is still a condition that we're learning a lot more about. And so there's still stuff that we don't know there. So, it could be any one of those 3. So making sure that you get the diagnosis, making sure that you get that fully rehab the ankle to make sure it's back to full function. If we quickly just do a quick little bit of an anatomy recap here, but you've got the ankle and you've got these ligaments, which are like the ropes, if you like. That's what gives our joint stability there. And you've got the main ones that are injured in an ankle sprain are what's called the lateral ligaments on the outside of the ankle. So there's 3 main ligaments there, and one of the main ligament that, in fact, it's actually the most frequently injured ligament in the body is what's called the anterior talofibular ligament. So it's one of those ligaments on the outside. So usually when you injure the ankle, it rolls inwards and you strain either one or a combination of 3 of those ligaments. But you've also got on the outside of the ankle, you've got a number of other structures as well there too. There's some tendons, there's some what we call some retinaculum there, and then you've got the bone there as well. So unfortunately, when you sprain your ankle, you can actually injure other things there too. So it's not just a ligament injury, but it can sometimes be other things that go along with it. So in terms of the symptoms that you get, people will say, it's typically, I tripped up on something, or I landed on something a bit funny, or stepped on someone's foot, and it's usually that ankle rolling inwards. And that's what we call an inversion sprain, or it's also called a lateral ligament sprain there as well, because it's on the outside of the ankle, the ligaments that get injured there. Sometimes some people will have difficulty, wearing weight on that ankle when you initially roll it. People will be like, oh yeah, just, took a couple of steps to be able to do it again. Some people can't even do that. They have to get carried off or hop off there. The swelling sometimes it can swell up, and for the listeners there, you may have experienced one of these where the ankle just blows up immediately. You just have you injure it and then up it goes. Now, Fortunately, that's not always a sign of severity. Just because it blows up like a balloon doesn't mean that it's bad. So don't always panic stations when you see that happen. The other one that can freak people out is the bruising that comes along with these things as well too. And for those watching the video, you can see the bruising, the visible. It can be quite scary, especially when the bruising starts to go down into spread down into the toes. And I'll often warn patients when they have one of these is, look, don't panic if you start to see the toes go black. Don't your toes aren't dropping off. It's just the blood that's come out from that sprain spreading down to the rest of the foot. So, and that can look particularly nasty. So it can freak people out with that one there. Firstly, so the first important thing to do after you've had an ankle sprain is to get a diagnosis. We mentioned before, one of the sort of reasons of it not getting right was that you missed the diagnosis and there was something else that was happening there. So in addition to just the ligament sprain and ligament injury, you can have things like what's called a syndesmosis injury, which is also, you might see this being termed as a high ankle sprain. And so this is a little bit higher up the ankle there. In fact, we've got our model of the foot, but if we have the lateral ligaments on the outside, the high ankle sprains are a little bit sort of more round through the front there, and that's called the syndesmosis. So you can have injuries to that. They do tend to take a little bit longer, and you need to be a little bit less aggressive with those. So again, it's why you need to be important to get a diagnosis on that. Fractures, unfortunately, bones can chip, things can break. So you've got to make sure that you rule out a fracture there. You don't want to be running on something when it does need rest for that bone to mend. We've got the tendons that run along the outside of the ankle. We mentioned those before, but they can tear. The tendons can tear as well as the covering over the top of them. And then you can also have what's called a talar dome lesions or osteochondral defects, and that's basically the joint there can actually sort of butt into each other, and you can chip bits off the bone there. Thankfully, those last few things are rare, but they can still happen. So you've got to make sure that you get a diagnosis to know exactly what you're dealing with there. So if we go on to some early management tips on what to do. So you've sprained your ankle. What should you do? Okay, so firstly, you've got your diagnosis, but if there's some delay of getting to someone to see, these are some of the things that you want to do. So one of the mnemonics that's been it used to be RICE, rest, ice, compression,
yes.
elevation. It then sort of switched to POLICE, which is protection, optimal loading, ice, compression, elevation. There's also another one that's sort of been doing a bit around the trends at the moment, peace and love, but I think it's really just expanding on this really. I think you can keep it pretty simple, and that's why I tend to just use.
Peace and love's getting a bit long. There's too many things to do.
It is. That's why I look at it and I go, well, that sort of falls under optimal loading, and that's sort of So I think it's sort of a bit common sense. I think it's So I stick with just advising the police now. It's easier to remember, but basically protection is that if something's damaged, you need to sort of get off it a bit. And that's where also that leads into the optimal loading part, is that you don't just want to completely rest it. There's going to be some sort of movement that you want to get in around through there. How much, again, will depend on what you've done. Ice, I will still use ice as a management early on, usually within the first sort of 48 hours there. It can be sort of good to help with pain and just to sort of help settle things down a little bit there. There's sort of, again, it's a bit of a debate at the moment, like, does ice, does it impair, we want some inflammation around through there, like are we going to be delaying the healing? I don't think there's really nothing conclusive to say that that's the case. And it also, because some people, these really hurt, that they can wake you up at night time. So using the ice on there can just help to get to people to sleep and get some good recovery. And then we've got compression and elevation as well too in the end of that. So that's, put a compression bandage on there and keeping it on there for usually a few days as well. And then elevation mainly just when you're not using it. So we've got that optimal loading. You're doing a little bit on it, but then the rest of the time you can have it elevated. So Do you immobilize it or not? So that's, when you first injure it, what should you do? Should you wrap it in something? We mentioned the compression bandage before, but there's actually some research to show that up to a week of putting it in a brace does actually, obviously with doing rehab in that meantime, putting it into a brace early can actually be of benefit. And it actually, the brace tends to be a little bit better than using like rigid tape or K tape or so bracing tends to be a bit more effective at the tape. Cost obviously comes into effect because, an ankle brace is, $50. And if it's the first time it's happened, it may just be cheaper, to put it in. And if you're not going to be walking around on your feet a lot, then tape can just be as good, because that's really all it's doing, is just giving the ankle a bit of support in that early stage, in that first week, just to make sure that there isn't anything happening there, any further damage is occurring.
Yeah.
So then we go on to, the other things that can help it in that early stage of just helping to calm down, get rid of the pain there. So I'm actually a fan of doing some manual therapy, some hands-on work in that early period there, and that in the very early period, like within a couple of days, can just be very light, sort of working around through there, just some very light mobilization in through the joint there, just again to help to sort of get some of that swelling out there and just to restore some of that normal movement. But it can also help to reduce pain. Like I've had that happen numerous times where people come in, limping, and you get some manual therapy around there, and then they go to pain-free walking. So it can be really good at helping to settle down that pain there, as well as helping to improve the range of movement, the stiffness that you get often with these. I'm not a big fan of using NSAIDs or anti-inflammatories early on. I think, we spoke about the ice maybe playing a role in, whether it did or did not cause a role in affecting the healing. But anti-inflammatories, I think we can argue that can impair that knitting of the tissue, because essentially when you've had a ligament sprain, things have split, there's bleeding around there, and you do need the body to come in with these inflammatory cells and knit those ligaments together. So I'm not a fan of taking anti-inflams early at any stage really for these. You can take Panadol, painkillers if it's really sore, then just some Panadine is you can take, but try and stay away from the anti-inflammatories. So early on, what we want to do, so we've got our bracing or our taping, we've got our ice in those first couple of days there, just to settle things down. The first thing we want to do is we want to start to get some movement into the ankle. So we want to get that, and that what that does is a couple of things. One is it helps to get that swelling out of the area. Two, it helps to improve that mobility, which is really important. And three, it also helps to get a nice, strong healing tissue. So if we know that when we've damaged something, like if we've damaged the ligament on the outside of the ankle there, if we stress it a little bit, the body picks up on that and thinks, oh, we need to make this a bit stronger. Where if you don't stress that at all, the body can sort of lay down some quite weak tissue. And that's across the board really for any time we're dealing with some damaged tissue, is that we want to stress it enough early on to sort of tell the body, hey, we need to knit things up nice and strong through here and get a good quality healing tissue. So that's why early movement and optimal loading in that police mnemonic there is quite important. So some examples of some early mobility stuff that you can be doing would be things like, doing some foot circles. So you're basically just drawing circles with your foot round in clockwise and anti-clockwise directions. Another one of my favorites is the foot alphabet. So you're basically just drawing the alphabet in whether you go capitals or lowercase, you can decide what you're going to do there. But just going through the alphabet and spelling that out in as bigger letters as you can, because again, that's sort of encouraging all those different combinations of movement around the ankle. Then we've got banded dorsiflexion. What that means for those that are listening on the podcast is you basically have a band around the front of the ankle, and you can use a belt as well that's tied onto something behind you, and you're actually just kneeling down on the opposite side, and then you're sort of lunging forward on that ankle there. So it's you sort of bringing the knee over the toes whilst the band sort of pulling it backwards, and that can help to put a bit of movement in that ankle joint. You can also put a weight on top of your knee as well to really further drive that forward. And then another particular favorite exercise of mine is what's called a 3D calf exercise. And that involves standing facing a wall. You're standing on the injured leg, and then you're sort of leaning in towards the wall. So you're sort of getting that stretch in through your in through the calf there. So you sort of go back and forward sort of 10 times. And then what you can do is then you can twist on it 3 times. So you're sort of then twisting from side to side 10 times. Okay. And then you can go from side to side. So you're taking the ankle through, you know, that's why it's called 3D, the 3 dimensions there, forwards and back, twisting on it, and then going from side to side. Again, it's sort of getting the ankle moving in lots of different directions, getting that swelling out of there, and helping with a nice strong healing tissue. Just a caveat.
It's interesting that, that you say that the movement actually helps it to heal, because a lot of people think rest is the best thing for healing, but I find that interesting.
That's right. Yeah, it's and as the saying goes, rest is rust. You know, we don't want to be resting, and like I said, you know, it's all it's all dependent on what you've done. You know, sometimes in the first few days, all you might be doing is foot exercise or foot alphabet there. So you're not being, you know, too aggressive with this, but yeah, even from day one, you're doing something on it. You're not just, because they used to sort of, you know, for these, it's like, oh well, let's put someone in a cast, so, you know, plaster cast, and see what that's like there. And they've actually found that compared that to early mobilization is more advantageous. So that's why we just say put you in a brace or a tape, which allows you to still get movement in the ankle. You're not blocking it completely up. Plus, you can also take that brace off and do some movement. And then when you get up and walking around, you can pop that brace back on there again. One of the caveats just with the early movement is what we say, forcing that dorsiflexion, so the knee over toes movement. Just got to be careful with doing that, especially if there's a high ankle sprain. Then you've got to, you know, that involving that syndesmosis joint you mentioned earlier on, that can actually be problematic, and that can sort of really stir that up. So you just got to be careful about, you know, pushing it just gently into discomfort, but not really being forcible with that. So just watching with that one there. The other thing that we find,
my word, there's a picture of someone standing on a Swiss board.
Well, that's right, and we'll get to that. But
I think I'd break a bone.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You certainly wouldn't be doing this immediately after an ankle sprain. It's or if I told someone to do that, they'd be looking at me funny. You often see, after, one of the things that does get knocked out and impaired after an ankle sprain is balance, and this is actually one of these things, and the same with mobility and balance, and even strength as well. People can injure their ankle, and they can have impairments in these indefinitely. You know, we'll have patients where we'll be assessing them, and they might come in with knee pain, and then you're assessing their balance, and it's like, oh yeah, actually I've sprained that ankle, you know, 5 times before. I had a really bad ankle sprain there, and they've still got loss of range or balance there. So balance is something that is really important, and so the ways that you can actually assess that, or you can assess it on yourself, is doing a single leg balance, and I'll actually talk about later on about some of the times that you want to be looking at for that. But earlier on, you can be doing just practice to single leg, standing on that leg there. You can do it eyes open, eyes closed as well, for a bit more challenge. But this can be done very early in the piece to help to get that control back online there. Another one of my favorites for early on is the what we call clock reaches, where you're basically standing on the sore leg. So you're standing on the sore ankle, and then you're reaching as far as you can in one direction and coming back to normal with the other leg. So you're sort of reaching, and you almost like imagine you're standing on a clock face. So you reach out in front of you, you're reaching out to 12 o'clock, then you reach out to 1 o'clock, then 2 o'clock, and you go all the way around the clock face there. So you're spinning the ankle in different directions, challenging that balance in different ways. And it's more of a sort of a dynamic balance, whereas standing on the spot there is more assessing the single balance. Now, what we don't, and this is actually something that, you know, I've seen a lot of people still given to this day, is unstable surface training. So that's, you know, standing on a wobbly Dura disc or a balance mat, or like this guy here standing on a Swiss ball. But we know actually that that's not that is not the best way to actually to train what we call this proprioception. So without getting too technical, but if you're standing on an unstable surface, you're actually training more of what's called your vestibular system, which is what your balance, which is sort of what tells you where you are. Now, what's happening with an ankle sprain is it's not affecting the vestibular system so much, it's affecting what we call the proprioceptive system, and that's the nerves that are in our ligaments and our joints and our muscles, and they're the things that tell our body where they are. So it's actually better to be standing on a stable surface and challenging yourself, like with these clock reaches there, or closing your eyes and just trying to maintain the balance. So stick with stable surfaces is basically the bottom line with that one there.
Glad to hear it, because I was not thinking, oh my God, that's Swiss ball.
No, exactly right. No, that's even the wobble discs and the Dura discs and wobble boards are still fairly popular these days. Probably not as much as what they used to, but that used to be a pretty staple for ankle sprains. Is you've done your ankle, get on the wobble board. But no, there's better ways to train that. So early goals, what do we want to see sort of early on? So there's sort of some of the things that we do early on, but what we want to achieve early on is we want to try and see the range of movement become equal to the other side. And one way that you can test this at home is with the knee to wall test. And basically, we've discussed this in some of our other podcasts, but basically what it is you face a wall. You set a ruler up against the wall there with the 0 against the wall, and what you do is that you then move your foot back a bit, and you then drive your knee towards the wall, and you want it to touch the wall. And so if you can touch, you just wiggle your toes back a little bit, and then you drive it forward again. And you keep wiggling those toes back until you can't touch anymore, and that's where you get your measurement from. So obviously easy for those that are listening, you can certainly refer to the recording of today to get a look at that one. But otherwise, you can just Google that knee to wall test. So we want to see that knee to wall test be equal, or at least early on, trying to get within 90% of each other. And for runners, we like to see upwards of 8 centimeters for that test as well. But there's always sort of exceptions, but generally upwards of 8 centimeters. But more importantly, we want to see them equal side to side. Yeah. The balance, so we mentioned before about that single leg balance. What we want to do is, and this is something for all our listeners to get out there and test themselves, is you want to be able to maintain single leg balance standing on the spot with your eyes open 30 seconds. You want to be able to do there. And eyes closed, you want to do that for longer than 10 seconds. So those that are younger, so those that are sort of below 30, should actually be able to do it upwards of 40 seconds with their eyes open. So I just sort of said, just generally across the board, 30 eyes open, 10 eyes closed. So don't have a few drinks before you do this. Otherwise, it's the old sobriety test. That's where the police will catch you out. But yes, I wanted a good thing to test now, because you may find that, your balance is no good, and you may have had an old ankle injury, and that's you're like, well, I actually still has never restored that. So that's a couple of things that we want to see, a couple of key tests that we want to see early on that we're ticking off. So if we go into sort of some more advanced stuff in terms of the rehab, so again, early on, sort of working on strength there, we can start with some banded exercises. So these are the ones that, you may have seen before, where we've got the different directions here. We've got, on the display here, we've got, banded and pointing the toes up towards your head, banded and pointing the toes downwards, banded pushing, going inwards, and then banded going outwards. Now, what we do in clinic, I've got a form of technology here. These what's called a handheld dynamometer. But basically what that allows me to do is allows me to test those movements and actually see, well, what actually is weak. And that way we can be a bit more time efficient with what we're doing there. Because a lot of people think that, you've rolled your ankle in, therefore it's going to be weakness in these ones going outwards. But actually a lot of the time it's not. It can be the opposite way as well too. So you don't always assume. And that's where I'm a big one for assessing to know what you're dealing with there. But if you don't have access to anything and you can't assess the strength, well, you can get on and start doing all 4 directions, basically just a shotgun approach of just hit everything and hope that you've covered what you're deficient in there. Not the most time efficient way of doing it, but I guess at least it makes sure that you're doing it. Early on, when things are really sore, you can do what's called some isometrics, which is basically just with the band around in a particular position, and then you're moving the foot, and then you're just holding that position there, and that's called an isometric. You're not moving it, but you're under resistance, and you can do five lots of 15 seconds there, and they can be done a few times a day actually, because they can also help a little bit with a little bit with pain and also a little bit with movement. As the pain starts to settle down, then you start to get more into the banded movement. And this is when you can go for reps, and ideally looking at 3 to 4 sets of 12 reps for those ones through there. So banded exercises they're a start. And it's really important I say a start, because some people get these and they think, oh yeah, I've done my banded exercise, I'm good to go. I've got that's all I need to do, isn't it? And no, as we're about to talk about, that's sort of the tip of the iceberg. So other considerations down there, we've got our feet. Our feet are really important. Obviously, they're the first thing that hit the ground there, and so working on our foot strength. And we've spoken about this before in our episode on plantar heel pain. But it's a really important one to make sure that we've got our strong feet underneath us. So doing things like spreading the toes, fanning the toes, moving them around, some banded toe flexion as well too. Some great exercises around through that. Obviously, it would be remiss of me not to talk about the calf strength, seeing as that's my favorite muscle group. So I think we've given it a plug in pretty much most of the talks we've done so far. But obviously, all calf exercises involve that movement around the ankle, and so really important to have good calf strength to protect that ankle joint as well. So you've got lots of different calf raise variations there. So you can start off with doing it on both legs, and initially when someone's really sore, you might just get them doing it on both, but they're putting most of their weight on the good side. And then as they get better, they start to move their weight more over to the sore side until they can then get that other leg off, and then they're onto single leg calf raises. And then you can sort of do it in different positions. So you can have, the feet turned in, the feet turned out, and sort of just stress different parts of the calf and the joint there. And then you can also go with the calf raises. You can go with the knee straight or the knee bent. So lots of different variations you can be doing for those. So really making sure that we're getting that calf strength right. And then you can also vary the depths and the speed. So as you start to get a little bit better here, you can start to go a little bit faster as we're getting more into the plyometrics, which we're going to talk about soon too. Some of my other favorite sort of calf exercises for those with ankle sprains are weighted toe walks. So what you're doing there is you're getting some weight and quite heavy too. So you might get, a couple of 20 kilos, or you get some garden buckets and you fill that up with stuff. You go on your tippy toes, and then you're just walking on your tippy toes there. You can go for sort of 10 meters, walk back, go again for 10 meters, and you can do sort of, 4 repeats of those there. That's a really good one for the foot and the ankle strength. The other ones we've got a what's called a Soleus Lunge, and basically what that's doing is combining a lunge. You're going onto stepping onto something off like a small step, or onto a weight there. You drop down into your lunge position, and then on that front leg, you're doing some calf raises there. So that's a really good one. So for that ankle strength and working on that, so that the calf
and that really is a good one for also being relatable to running and trail running.
Yeah, it is a good one, and that's one I'll sort of throw into the mix every now and then for just something a little bit different. It's not the best one for building strength in through that soleus, the lower calf, but it's a good one as a bit of a challenge and to mix things up a bit. But so that's another one. We've got our box step down as well, where what you're doing with that, or is you standing on a box or a step, and then you're just trying to standing on the sore side and trying to touch the opposite leg down to the ground. So that's the advantage with that exercise is that it's good for strength, but it's also, as you can see, doing a similar to our knee to wall test. It's really getting that ankle range back, that what we call that dorsiflexion range. So it's sort of a good one to kill 2 birds there, as you're getting
a bit of balance there too, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah. So and you can weight that. You can hold on to some weight when you're doing it, but I think just initially just doing it, trying to do it with your body weight is a good way to start there. And then we've got another sort of variation of a wall sit, where you get into you sit back into a wall and then you raise up onto your tippy toes there. So another good one again for to get that ankle and that lower calf. So then we also got, now it's important though, when we see someone with an ankle sprain, is that there are often, even if it's a fresh ankle sprain, there are often strength deficits along that same side. So there might be some, and it's quite commonly found actually, hip muscle issues. And arguably one could say, well, there was, these issues there before that then predisposed that ankle to rolling. So important also to assess for that. And whilst you're recovering from an ankle sprain, it gives you a really good opportunity to work on some areas that you may have neglected, or and this is always, we call this the silver lining to any injury. You're out for might be out for a period of time, but hey, what else can you do? Runners out there, I haven't been very good with my strength training recently. Well, now's a great time to start. And there's lots of different variations out there you can do. If one side's sore, you've got two legs, you can still work the other side. So you can be doing some single leg work. So a split squat's one of our favorite ones here, where the sore ankle is just resting up on the table behind you. It's not doing anything. You can put that in a TRX sling, so it's even less pressure on that ankle joint there. You can always position that ankle so it's not sore, but then you're working the other leg. There's a phenomenon called the crossover effect, or the cross education effect, where if you train one side, you get benefits into the other side. So even though the injured leg, you might not be able to do much on that, if you train the good leg, you're still going to get some benefits amazingly happening in the injured leg there. So don't forget that to work the uninjured side. Don't let that one waste away just because you can't use the opposite side. And there's also there's single leg work, like machine work is good as well. So doing your leg press on the opposite side when you've hurt the other ankle. So there's always alternates. So you speak to your health or fitness professional about ways that you can train around that injury. Now, the next one we're going to talk about area, which is a really neglected area of rehab with these, and it's actually probably the most important, I reckon, is plyometrics. And plyometrics are basically explosive exercises. And running, one could argue, is a form of plyometric exercise, in that we're involving very short times on the ground. We're having to be quite explosive with, we're only on the ground for less than, for 0.25 of a second. So our body's got to absorb and then generate force within that short period of time. So some of the things that can be done, and plyometrics is such a big class of exercises there. There's obviously a wide spectrum, where you start, really easy stuff at the beginning, and then you can progress to harder stuff. So some early stuff that's really good are what's called tall to short landings. And what that is you're basically standing, raise up on your tippy toes, and then you sort of almost do a little bit of a jump in the air, but you're more just switching all your weight onto one side. So say you've got the injured side there, so you raise up on your tippy toes, up in the air, and then you drop down onto the sore side. So it's again sort of getting a little bit of impact happening there on the injured side, but it's a really easy way to start into it. So those tall to short landings. Hopping, just hopping on the spot. And this is often one way that you can see when people haven't fully recovered from an ankle sprain, you just get them hopping and you can see they're just dead. Like they've just got no spring on that side. They're often really heavy on their landings, whereas on the good side, they're nice and springy and light. And this is something for all our listeners to check on themselves as well, is just compare your hopping from side to side. It can give you quite a good indication, just that test in itself. Then we've got progressing on to step and box jumps. So I tend to get people jumping up onto a step first. So because there's less impact forces, you're sort of generating the force to get you up, but then because you're landing a bit higher, there's not the impact of coming down. So I'll tend to get people going 2 legs up first, then going up, progressing onto 1 leg up, and then you can go, 1 leg up and 2 legs down, and then 1 leg up and 1 leg down. And that's just onto a step. And then you can progress onto going a bit onto higher heights for box jumps as well too. So that's a good progression through those. And then we've got more advanced plyometrics here. So these are where things get really sort of start to get a bit more explosive and more higher impact there. We've got our broad jumps, which is basically on 2 legs, jumping as far as you can. We've got some different hops for distance there. So basically that's, standing on 1 leg and jumping all the way out sideways as far as you can. You can also do that inwards as well too. We've got bounding, which is sort of running along, sort of going from one leg to the other. And then we've got things like a triple hop for distance, where you're hopping on the same ankle there three times in a row, really trying to get as far as you can. And that in itself is actually a good test, because you can compare from side to side. You can sort of see how well I'm recovering. And then you can add things later on, like you can add distractions, or someone can throw something at you, as you're doing it. But for runners, we often don't need to go down that path unless they've got a really, just an ankle that just really falling into that chronic ankle instability class there, where we just really want to challenge them to make sure that they're good to go for, when they're out in the trails, and they're not going to, when they're not aware of their surroundings, that their body is able to adjust for what's thrown at it. Then we can do our running drills. So even though we might not be able to run early on, there's still some drills that we can do. So a karaoke drill, which is like a running from side to side. So you'll sometimes see the footy players doing these ones when they're running from side to side. So they're a good one to get the ankle moving. And then we've got our A skips and our B skips. So we're starting to get, a little bit more with that plyometric there. We're starting to get a bit of load going through the ankle and getting that ready to run. So there's some good, some of my favorites there. There's obviously a heap of running drills that you can use, but they're probably the more commonly used ones that I'll use for the ankles. Whilst people are out from running, cross training is obviously something that people are usually pretty keen to try and keep their fitness going. Early on, like in the early period, you can swimming, get in the pool. Just be careful with using flippers there, because sometimes that might not feel very nice on the ankle. So, and even early on, I'll just get people using a pull buoy. So if it's really bad and just want to keep them going, then just get a pull buoy there and just pull using only pull using only the arms there. So swimming, otherwise stationary bike, that's generally pretty well tolerated early on, and I tend to prefer the stationary bike versus swimming, because there's obviously a bit more of a carryover to running. It's working the leg muscles a bit more on that. So we'll get them on the stationary bike early on if the ankle's tolerating that. And then the next progression from that is then on the cross trainer. So it's a bit more weight bearing on that, putting a bit more demand on the ankle joint, but there's not the impact forces that running has. So it's sort of a bit of a stepping stone of going from the bike to the cross trainer, if you've got access to that. Return to running. So, and obviously, being the runners listening in today, you won't think, well, how do I know when I'm ready to run? The time missed for these sort of injuries can be varied, and it really does depend on the extent of what you've done. I've had plenty of runners that haven't missed a run. They've a very low grade there. We're able to sort of put a bit of protection around through there and give them some things to work on, but they are able to still keep going. And then there can sometimes be runners that miss upwards of 6 weeks, and sometimes even longer than that for the more severe injuries. It's really important, though, that we base it on criteria, not just time. It's not like you just, and what we mean by that is it's like, well, we don't just sort of say, 2 weeks and you're right to go. Yeah. It's more like, well, here's what we want to see. We want to see you get, this strength, mobility, control around through their balance. Have you got all those tick, 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 tick? Then yes, you're ready to go. And that's what we call criteria based. And that just ensures that we've got a really nice, healthy, fully functioning ankle and human on top of that to ensure that we make a successful return to running. So some of the criteria that we'll use to determine you're ready to go for running, we want to see the ankle range. So we've got our knee to wall test there. So we want to see that being within 90% of the other side, and this is so when you're ready to go out for that first run. We've got our balance nice and symmetrical, so the eyes open and the eyes closed. So remember the 30 seconds eyes open and 10 seconds eyes closed there. We want to have our ankle strength the same, and for those at home, it's a little bit hard to assess this, but certainly from my perspective, when we're testing the strength here, we want to make sure that it's within 90% of the uninjured side. Calf raises is another good one to test the strength around the ankle there. So we want to make sure we've mentioned that multiple times before, making sure that we've got more than 25 reps on each side, on the injured side there, and within 90% of the uninjured side. We want to be able to do a single leg jump up onto a step and land. So, 30 centimeters, 25 centimeters there. So single leg up and land. We want to be able to do those 5 times with that feeling pretty comfortable and not hurting there. And then we also then use a hopping program, which is basically hopping on the spot. So you can sort of do, 10 hops on the spot, 10 from side to side, 10 forwards and back, and then 10 diagonal. So you're sort of going in all different directions there. So you're challenging it in different directions and making sure that they're comfortable in doing that. And then the last thing we look for is, do you feel confident? You're feeling confident in the ankle, because if we pass all those and the runner's like, no, I don't feel very good, then it's often a sign that there's something that's not quite right there. Sometimes the runner just needs a bit of a nudge along and says, no, you're right to go. But sometimes it's actually, no, this does just need a little bit more work, and we'll just spend a little bit more time working on these things. And so having that confidence back in the ankle is really important. So there's some of the things that we look for in return to running. When we do return to running, should you brace it? Should you tape it? We know that those that wear braces, and this has mainly been done in field sports, because this is where most of the ankle sprains occur. So there hasn't been any studies that have looked at runners and braces. But those that in the field sports, those that do wear braces, it does reduce your risk of having another injury. So they do work. I
always thought braces weakened your ankle.
No, actually, we've got you've preempted there on the next slide. Actually, we talk about just on that, but no, they actually do not. So there's no difference in strength there. And Cordova looked at that back in 2000. Okay. So it is it's one of these sort of myths that do get circulated that no, once you've got it, you've got a reliance on it. No, thankfully it doesn't work that way at all. So there's no weakening of the ankle by doing that. In terms of, do you go with braces or you go with tape? Look, it's sort of, it doesn't really matter so much. They've pretty much got equal benefits through there. So it really comes down to personal preference. So, cost wise, if you're going to be doing this, wearing it quite a bit, if you've had a long history of ankle sprains, and you're tackling some pretty technical trails, I'd suggest then looking at braces, because it's just easy to put on. You're going to be doing it for a while, versus taping. It's more for those that might do it for the short, only need it for a short term, and it can be cheaper in the long run if you're not going to be doing it again and again. The other thing too to consider is that taping, you need to know how to tape, and I'll obviously show my runners how to do that. But braces can be easy just to slip on. Plus, you don't have the skin irritation sometimes that taping does. So it really comes down to preference. Also, some runners don't like the bulkiness of a brace in their shoe. It just doesn't feel very good. So there's lots of things to sort of consider there as to whether you tape it or whether you go with a brace. So, but as you mentioned, there's no weakening of the ankle, so you can be rest assured there. And general, the recommendation is, recommendation in field sports, is to brace or tape up to 12 months after the injury. But I think for runners, I don't tend to do this as much, because it's sort of a lower risk sport. So for my footy players and netball players that are out there and it's change of direction and contact and those sort of things, it's more common to see. Those ones I will get them taping it more long term. But the runners, I will often move them off a bit sooner than that, especially if they've ticked all the boxes and function's really good. Then and it was a bit of a freak occurrence where it happened. Then I'm less inclined to sort of say, you need to be wearing this for the next 12 months. So, but they're just a few things on the bracing and the taping. So if we wrap it up, firstly, important to get a good get the diagnosis right and identify what's going on. So get a really thorough examination to what's happening there. Secondly, we want to make sure that we've identified those deficits, and you want to make sure that you're addressing them. So we want to make sure you've got that balance back, we've got that mobility back, and we've also got that strength as well. We're using a criteria base to return to running, and not just looking at a time of, that's a 2-week injury, 2 weeks, I'm right to go. Want to make sure that you're able to do all the things we outlined before. And then you're using brace or tape when you go back to help to reduce the recurrence. So there's gone through a bit of information there. Hopefully that our runners can take in terms of addressing these things, whether they happen on the trail or the track or around the house. That they can now know what to do.
Well, thank you so much. That's really good information. And certainly, twisting your ankle, for want of a better word, is common on the trails, because when there's rocks and sticks and whatnot and slippery, and but if I do general strength work, will that help me to avoid that sort of an injury?
I think in short, yes, it will. So if you look at, if you're going to do nothing versus strength work, yes, doing strength work will absolutely help you. And I mean, you look at some of the stuff that we put in the exercises there before. I mean, they're not specifically, a lot of that's not just ankle specific stuff. It's, a lot of that with good programming, some of the stuff that you'd put together would tick a lot of those things anyway. So absolutely. So I think there's a lot to be said for, for working single leg, which helps a little bit with working your balance as well. And the stronger you are around those round through the legs, then you'd help to lower your risk of actually sustaining these injuries. So yes, just another reason to strength train is reduce your chances of ankle sprains.
I love to find another reason.
Like, conforms your bias very nicely then.
It does indeed. Yes.
Excellent.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming on again. And
you're welcome.
If people have any questions, get onto the Facebook podcast page, and Luke's on there too, so you can always put a question in there and he will be happy to answer.
More than happy. Thanks for having me on again, Isabel, and look forward to chatting again in future.
No worries. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.